The moment I realized my husband was having an affair, I didn't scream, I didn't confront him, and I definitely didn't cry. Instead, I quietly finished my coffee and looked at the message glowing on my phone screen. Because the message wasn't meant for me. It was meant for her. My coworker, the same woman who sat at 2 desks away from me every morning, the same woman who smiled at me during meetings and asked about my weekends, and the same woman who had just texted my husband, "Tonight again. She'll be working late anyway." For a moment, the world felt very still. Not shattered, not chaotic, just clear, you see. Betrayal doesn't always arrive with drama. Sometimes it arrives with a single message. And the strange thing about moments like that is how quickly your mind starts rearranging the past. The late nights, the unexplained meanings, the sudden distance in his voice, all the little things that never quite made sense suddenly fit together perfectly. My husband Mark and I had been married for 9 years. 9 years of shared routines, shared bills, shared plans, and apparently shared lies. But the deeper betrayal wasn't just Mark. It was her, Emily, my coworker, the woman I had personally recommended for a promotion just 6 months earlier. At the time I thought I was helping a talented colleague grow in the company. Now I realized I had been helping the woman who was sleeping with my husband. I sat there staring at the message for a long time. Not because I was shocked, but because I was thinking. Most people imagine revenge as something loud, arguments, scenes, public confrontations. But those kinds of reactions give the other person something valuable: control. And I had no intention of giving Mark or Emily control over anything again. So instead, I did something very simple. I put the phone down and I started paying attention. Over the next few weeks, I watched everything: Mark's habits, Emily's schedule, the way their coincidental meetings kept appearing on the same days, and slowly, the entire picture revealed itself. Their affair wasn't new. It had been going on for months. They met after work, sometimes during lunch, and occasionally during business trips that were never actually business trips. But what fascinated me most wasn't the betrayal itself. It was their confidence. They weren't even careful anymore because they believed I would never notice. Or worse, that if I did notice, I would simply fall apart. What they didn't realize was that they had underestimated the wrong person, because there was one detail about my life they had completely forgotten. I wasn't just another employee at that company. I was the person who helped build it, and the department both of them worked in. It answered to me. The first phase of my plan was patience. I didn't confront them. I didn't hint that I knew. Instead, I allowed them to continue exactly as they had been, because people reveal the most about themselves when they think they are safe. Emily became bolder every week. She flirted openly with Mark during office events. Sometimes I even caught her glancing at me with a strange kind of smug satisfaction, as if she believed she had already won. Mark wasn't much better. He had grown distant at home, cold, detached, but strangely confident. He believed he was living 2 separate lives, one with me, one with her. What neither of them realized was that those 2 lives were about to collide. The opportunity arrived 3 months later. Our company was preparing for a major executive review meeting. Senior leadership, board members, department heads, everyone important would be there. Emily was scheduled to present part of the financial analysis, a promotion opportunity she had been eagerly waiting for. Mark, meanwhile, had recently joined her project team, which meant both of them would be sitting in the same room in front of the entire team leadership group. And that's when I made my move. The night before the meeting, I finished compiling a report not about their affair. That would have been too easy. Instead, I focused on something far more damaging: professional misconduct. Because while Mark and Emily had been busy sneaking around, I had also been making careless mistakes. Missed deadlines, unauthorized budget changes, unreported conflicts of interest. Every small detail. They believed no one would notice, except someone had noticed me. The next morning, the conference, room filled slowly with executives and directors. Emily sat confidently near the front, Mark beside her, both of them smiling as if their careers were about to take a major step forward when the meeting began. Emily stood and walked to the presentation screen. Her voice was confident, professional. For the first 5 minutes, everything went exactly the way she expected, until I raised my hand. "Before we continue," I said calmly, "there are a few concerns about the financial data." The room became quiet. Emily looked surprised. "What concerns?" I connected my laptop to the screen, and the first slide appeared. Documentation, transaction, records, email chains. Every decision they had made while distracted by their affair, every mistake, every ethical violation. Emily's confident expression vanished. Mark stared at the screen in disbelief. The board members began asking questions. Serious questions. Within 15 minutes, the entire meeting had shifted direction. Instead of discussing promotions, the conversation was now about investigations, professional conduct, accountability. Emily tried to defend herself. Mark tried to interrupt, but the evidence was already there. When the meeting finally ended, the outcome was simple. Emily's promotion review was canceled. Mark's position was suspended, pending investigation, and both of them had suddenly become the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. Later that afternoon, Mark confronted me in the parking garage, his face pale, his voice shaking. "You planned this?" I looked at him quietly. "No," I replied. "You did?" He stared at me, confused. "I just paid attention." That evening, I went home alone for the first time in years. And strangely enough, the silence in the house didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. Because sometimes revenge isn't about destroying someone's life. Sometimes it's simply about letting their own choices destroy it for them. And the moment they finally realize it is usually the quietest moment of all. The parking garage smelled faintly of oil and cold concrete when Mark confronted me that evening. The confidence he used to carry so easily was gone. His shoulders were tense. His tie hung loose around his neck. For the first time in years, he looked like a man who realized he had made a very expensive mistake. "You set us up," he said. I closed my car door slowly and looked at him. "No," I replied calmly. "You did." His expression hardened. "You knew about us." "Yes." "For how long?" "Long enough." He ran a hand through his hair, clearly trying to piece together the last few months in his mind. "The meeting, the report, the investigation," he muttered. "You planned everything." I shook my head slightly. "You gave me everything I needed." There's something interesting about betrayal. People who lie for long enough begin believing they're smarter than everyone else. Mark and Emily had been so busy enjoying their secret that they forgot something very simple. Affairs make people careless. Missed work, poor decisions, conflicting records. Every mistake they made at the company had quietly piled up in the background while they focused on each other. All I did was collect the evidence. Mark stared at the ground for a moment. "Emily says you're trying to destroy us." I smiled faintly. "If I wanted to destroy you, Mark, I would have exposed the affair." He looked up sharply. "But I didn't." "Why not?" "Because professional consequences last longer than emotional scandals." He didn't answer. Because he understood exactly what that meant. By the next week, the investigation had already expanded beyond our department. Internal auditors began reviewing Emily's financial reports. Senior leadership started questioning Mark's involvement in several contracts. Neither of them were fired immediately. That would have been too simple. Instead, they were placed under review. Promotions frozen. Projects reassigned. Reputations quietly damaged. In large companies, careers rarely collapse overnight. They erode slowly and painfully. Emily tried to talk to me. 2 days later, she approached my desk during lunch. Her confidence from before had completely disappeared. "You ruined everything," she said quietly. I looked up from my laptop. "No, you did." Her eyes filled with frustration. You could have just confronted us and give you the chance to lie." She didn't answer. "Emily," I continued calmly, "you made your decisions knowing exactly what you were doing. You slept with your colleague's husband, you helped him lie, and you expected there would never be consequences." Her voice dropped. "We made a mistake." I closed my laptop. "No," I said softly, "you made a choice. And choices always have consequences." Over the next month, things continued exactly the way I expected. Emily resigned before the investigation finished. Mark lasted a little longer, but once the auditors uncovered several compliance violations connected to his department, the company made its decision. His position was terminated. The day he packed his things from the office was the first time in years I saw him look truly defeated. Not angry, not defensive, just exhausted. He passed my desk on his way to the elevator for a moment. He stopped. "I never thought you'd do something like this." I met his eyes. "That's because you never really paid attention to who I was." He hesitated, then nodded slightly, and walked away. Months later, life finally felt normal again. The house felt lighter without tension. Hanging in the air, work became peaceful again. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was living my own life instead of sharing it with someone who never respected it. One evening, I ran into a former coworker at a cafe downtown. She hesitated before speaking. "Did you hear about Mark?" "No, he moved out of the city. Apparently his new job paid less than half his old salary." Emily had disappeared from the industry entirely. No one knew where she ended up. I simply nodded and sipped my coffee. Because the truth is, revenge had never been the goal. Justice had been Mark. And Emily thought they had fooled me. They thought they had control over the situation. But the biggest mistake people make when they betray someone quietly is assuming that quiet means weak. Sometimes quiet just means patient. And patience is far more dangerous than anger, because anger reacts, but patience waits. And when the moment finally arrives, it doesn't need to shout. It simply lets the truth speak for itself.